up and welcome to My Point of View. I am your fat and opinionated host, also known as Cinema Shogun. And we've heard a lot about Bryan Kohberger. We've talked about him a lot, but we're still getting new insight. And more people are coming forward who know him, who are speaking about him. Also, other people, analysts and things, they're throwing out their theories. And one ex-FBI agent has come out and basically said that Bryan Kohberger had an incel complex that basically made him do what he did. Now, how many of you all believe that Bryan Kohberger was an incel? And do you even know what an incel is? Chances are in 2023, you've heard the word a lot because it seems like that accusation, that name, it gets thrown around too much. You know, it's almost like an insult that they throw at people who may play video games, or they may do this, they may do that. So I see the word incel thrown around a lot these days, but does Bryan Kohberger really qualify as an incel? I would say, in my personal opinion, not necessarily. Now, we know that Bryan was kind of awkward. We know that he maybe had trouble with some women, but Bryan was still out there living his life, going to school. He even had somewhat of a social life. When I think of an incel, I normally think of someone stuck in their parents' basement who have never had, any type of relationship with a woman. Whereas I think Bryan Kohberger was awkward and maybe had some awkward experiences. But however, Bryan Kohberger does not necessarily have all of the incel traits, because just as many people that we've heard from that said Bryan Kohberger is weird, we've heard from just as many people who were actually friends with Bryan Kohberger, who said he was cool, smart, they went jogging with him, and things like that. They used to go do drugs with Bryan Kohberger. We've heard from a lot of junkies that used to get down with the Kohberger. And when I think of incels, I usually don't think of people who are in the drug scene. So, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but let's go ahead and hear from this ex-FBI agent. I'm going to tell you all right now, when it comes to these ex-FBIs and ex-CSI, I'm an ex-cop, I'm an ex-lawyer. I don't really buy into a lot of these people, because in reality, if they were as good at their jobs as they claim to be, then they would probably still be doing that instead of appearing on random television shows that have horrible ratings and popping up on YouTube and stuff like that. And one thing I've noticed throughout this case specifically, sorry, my dog keeps barking. Anyway, specifically during this case, I've looked at some of the mainstream media's coverage of it, and I never watched the mainstream media. It's been years since I've tuned into anything the mainstream media does. I see clips online and stuff like that, and I get my news from other sources, just not the mainstream media. So I've watched some of the coverage, and I couldn't help but realize that a lot of these experts that appear on these news shows are really just people who copy, literally sometimes word for word, what various YouTubers and smaller creators talk about online. They take those theories, they take it sometimes word for word, and then they go to CNN, Fox News, Dateline, 2020, whatever news network you can think of, MSNBC, News Nation. News Nation has a lot of them on all the time. These experts that come in and weigh in on cases, and all they do is literally take the words out of YouTubers' mouths, and then they go on television with it. Most of these people do not look into cases as closely as most of the people you see covering these stories on YouTube. These are just analysts that get a call like, hey, you used to be in the FBI. We're going to talk to you about this. They go on Twitter. They copy what they see on Twitter. They get the information that other people actually spent time digging up, and then they take it and they go on the news and act like, oh yeah, this is what my findings. And half the time they're wrong with their theories, and they cause a lot of speculation and drama online all the time. So I don't follow up with a lot of these ex-FBI, ex-cops. But let's see what this guy has to say. University of Idaho suspect Bryan Kohberger may have been driven to kill by his history of social media issues and a possible incel complex, a former FBI investigator says. The unalivings may have been an effort to assert some type of dominance, former FBI agent and security expert Pete Yachmitz explained this week. I believe a continued unaliving of a victim or a continued stabbing of a victim indicates an uncontrollable rage and extreme anger, Yachmich said, noting that Kohberger has been described as socially awkward with a long history of interpersonal problems. I think he may have developed a sort of incel complex. The term incel, an abbreviation for involuntary celibate, is generally used to refer to men who struggle to establish romantic or sexual relationships. The identity is occasionally linked to misogynistic online forums and, in extreme cases, crime. Though it is not a proper psychological definition, Psychology Today noted last year that men who identify as incels often have poor mental health and experience feelings of victimhood, inferiority, and loneliness. Yachmich's personal analysis of Kohberger echoed that of Dr. Carol Lieberman, a forensic psychiatrist, who told Court TV last week that she believed the suspect fit the incel profile. I have been saying from the beginning that he's an incel, Lieberman said, explaining that she was largely convinced due to Kohberger's alleged choice of victims, or decision to target mostly female college students. Lieberman was also intrigued by evidence which suggested Kohberger returned to the crime scene in the hours after the unalivings. Incels like to be known for when they unalive people, or when they have a conquest like this, she said. On the one hand, he wanted to commit the perfect crime and not be caught, but on the other hand, he did want to be caught and be proud in a sense of what he did. So, I understand what they're saying. I'm not here to say that Kohberger is not an incel. I'm just saying that word gets thrown around a lot these days. And just as easily as we can call Kohberger an incel, I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest otherwise. I don't know if you all know this. I know these ex-FBI agents do not know this because they don't really look into these cases. They just pretend to for clout on television. But Bryan Kohberger used to have women over at his apartment. His neighbors have even said that. What were they doing? I don't know. Maybe they were just studying. Maybe it was an awkward experience for those women. But Kohberger had women over at his apartment. Kohberger was in the scene of doing some hardcore stuff. You know what I mean? So in that scene, there's a lot of drugs and sex in that scene. So I don't think that Kohberger's necessarily an incel. Also, I haven't seen any evidence from this crime as of yet to suggest that there was a sexual motive behind it. Now, we're going to learn more. Who knows exactly what happened here? But I haven't seen anything necessarily to suggest that. But oftentimes, sex is one of the motivations when people do things like what Kohberger did. So do I believe Kohberger got some type of sexual gratification from doing what he did? I think that's a strong possibility. But to just call Kohberger an incel, maybe. But I mean, he was actually a person who seemed to be kind of out there. From what I heard, sometimes at his apartment complex, he would just talk people's heads off. So he wasn't always this antisocial, person that people are making him out to be. I know at one portion of his life he was. But if you look into what everyone has said, there was this change in Kohberger. He started boxing. He became aggressive. He went from getting bullied to becoming a bully. So I think that this situation, like I said, I'm not trying to defend Kohberger in any way, but I think this situation is a little more complex than just writing it off like, oh, Kohberger's an incel who never had luck with women, so he killed these people. I think this situation, I know things like that happen all the time. Don't get me wrong. And that's a possibility here. But I can't help but feel like this situation is much more complex than that. And I don't want to simplify it. I don't want to simplify what Kohberger did, because I think it's important to better understand what causes things like this to happen. Why do people do things like this? And if we just write it off like, oh, He's an incel, had trouble getting women. I think that's doing this case a disservice because there's so many layers to peel back here, and there's so much more here to suggest that this was more of a complex crime than just an act of a horny guy who never could get his rocks off, you know? And I hate to be so blunt when I say it that way, but that's the reality of the situation. That's what people are trying to boil this crime down to. They're boiling it down to Bryan Kohberger never had luck with women, so he did this. It's way more complex than that. Look at Bryan's education. Look at Bryan's history. Look what Bryan was studying to be. This is way more complex than just Bryan being an incel, but maybe he was also an incel along the way. But hey, let me know your thoughts. Is he an incel, not an incel? What do you think motivated Bryan to do this? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. While you're down there, hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and remember, always remain opinionated.